everyone for your patience and for joining us today. For our next presenters, we have the Salmon River Restoration Council. We have Stefan, Dosch, and Deja Malone-Persha presenting. So we're going to hear a little bit about some restoration on the Salmon River. So here you go. Pass the mic.
Oh, I got one.
You got one already? All right, excellent.
This one's working for everyone.
I hope so. Is there a light on it? You get that one. Try this one.
Okay, let's get this. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Stefan, and just quickly, I want to kind of tell everyone where we are, because a lot of you might know the Salmon River and some of you probably don't. Just over the mountains, there's a kind of westernly facing watershed, Salmon River watershed, and it has a lot different impairments than where we've been talking the last presentations in the Scott River and the Shasta River. But so what we're focusing on is a little bit different. It's about 98-point-something% federal U.S. Forest Service land. There's a lot different usage problems and impairments. So basically, geologically, it's a pretty tight corridor, and so it makes wider floodplain spots that much more important. And with the history of hydraulic mining, those spots have been largely constricted, and the floodplain has been filled with boulders. So we're going to focus on two different spots where Salmon River Restoration Council and partners, the tribe, and the Forest Service involved too, in floodplain analysis and riparian assessment in the valley from 2006 to 2008 to identify sites that could be potentially improved. And these are two, they're not the highest priority sites, but it's just how things work. What we can get done, we're going to try and get done. So we've got, first we'll start at Kelly Bar, which is it's on the North Fork, 2 miles or so down from Sawyer's Bar. And it's in a special spot of the river that is kind of wider and has potential for floodplain enhancement. So we'll start there. Kelly Bar was identified in that floodplain analysis as a place that has large bars, some cold water input, and the potential for some refugia. And so because this system is so flashy and so constricted and doesn't inundate these bars anymore since mining, in particular, we approached this kind of thinking about some project goals in that sense. So we drilled 5 wells across the site. There's 12 acres of largely denuded bar, and we did some test pits, and we sat down with a design team and thought over a few years, like, what can we do to this spot? Hadn't really been touched in that way prior to this. So basically the main goals and objectives of this project were to improve connectivity into the floodplain and increase riparian shading and revegetate tailing piles or river bar in this case, some of it being tailing piles. And so, yeah, after some good design process, a few years, we came up with 4 different design alternatives. And the ultimate plan became to dig a pond at a spot that kind of showed itself as potential willow pond, just on the map, connected to an alcove in purple with a seasonal channel. The other channel there is just a high flow 2-year event or more channel that's designed to just jet out that feature and maintain it so it doesn't just sediment in and become nothing. And there's apex jams at the top of that, and at the top of a back channel on the west bar, and then at the top of a channel that does the same thing and cleans out that other big alcove that we dug on the west bar, which it's too bad that bar is at the top of the screen, but you can't, I don't know how to get rid of it, but the river comes back there and touches that alcove, you can imagine it. And then there's Kelly Pond, was another pond of, through investigation looked like it, and it used to have a pond there, duck pond there, it seemed like potential. And the gulch comes in right there. So it's, that was the, and then the, like a pretty large scale revegetation effort involving a bunch of pilot projects, planting trenches that Deja is going to tell everybody about. So after our initial assessment and with our wells and monitoring of those wells and subsurface analysis, there was a spot that showed pretty good groundwater influence. So we decided to put a pond there, and you can kind of see how digging the pond and increasing what we get from that hyporheic flow gave us pretty good water quality throughout the year in this pond, even though it might have some algae blooms like ponds do. But this habitat is connected by a channel that fish still get this indication, and we have fish observations in this pond. So there's Willow Pond beforehand and after. And then the West Bar alcove is that top alcove that you just had to imagine how it hit the river before, but now you can see how it hits the river. And the important thing to remember is, like, we on the Salmon River, we're focusing largely on winter rearing habitat. Like, that's one of our missing links. Is summer habitat is really needed, and refugia is always really needed. But the biggest thing we have going on is that we have some spawning fish. We don't have dams on our river, and we have a good spring Chinook population still. And so we have these fish that need to overwinter on the Salmon River, and they just get blown out and blasted out of the system because there's no off-channel habitat for them to explore. So this is, our focus is on winter rearing habitat, and our summer observations are kind of a positive, like extra. But the West Bar alcove really did a great job providing both, and because it has flow through the bar. And so we see fish in there year round. The pond too, we see fish in year round, and water quality remains just fine. The alcove at the bottom of that is another feature where beforehand it had very, very infrequent connection with the river. High flow events would push it up over the bar, but it was a thin surface layer that would just wash across the bar and then recede. So we were able to connect that. That stays inundated and connected until like mid-June every year, varies. And then it is designed to be connected to the river so that it flushes out at dry dewaters out to the river, and then the seasonal channel dewaters up to the pond. So our stranding is trying to be minimal. We'd have had minimal stranding on site, but we monitor every month, and we get fisheries people out there and had to relocate fish a couple times. In this feature, the bottom one, during exploration, we could have done a better job with subsurface exploration and drilled a few more wells, because even though over here where our wells were, we showed that there was good groundwater, something happens underground that we couldn't tell. And this feature, the water is way earlier than we expected. So we had to go back in and adjust this feature and make it another alcove like that just is directly connected with the river now. So it was a good follow-up. It's unfortunate because it's such a large pond. When it is inundated, it would be nice if it functioned that way, but it's okay. It functions the way it is now.
Great, so I'll speak to the fisheries and vegetation observations we've had post-implementation. And so photographed here is the West Bar alcove, which, as Stefan described, is connected to the river year-round. It's one of our 2 perennial features. Willow Pond is the other feature that's providing perennial habitat. And while Stefan mentioned that this project was really designed for winter slow flow refugia, especially for the juvenile life stage in spring Chinook, but also in coho, we really see more fish occupancy. We have seen more fish occupancy in the summer for cold water refugia. So this is one of those areas. And in all the features that we have on site, we've had fish observations within. So this graph shows all the discrete fish observations on site, and each symbol represents a different feature, habitat feature. So West Bar alcove that we were just looking at is the red cross, and it's shown over the lifetime of our project post-implementation. So the line is temperature in the North Fork Salmon River, which is adjacent to our perennial habitat, and well, all habitat on site. And as you can see, the peaks represents the high temperatures in summer, and the troughs are the low temperatures in winter. And coinciding with those peaks in high summer temperature, we're seeing more fish occupancy on site. So it's been a kind of an ancillary benefit of doing this work here and really focusing on these habitat features that are fed by hyporheic cold water flow. And we also have had fish observations in nearly every month since project implementation. And this is all in habitat that didn't exist before. And just to let you know, the impetus for the project was coho. We haven't unfortunately seen coho on the North Fork Salmon River in a few years, but we have had Chinook using this project, both spring and fall Chinook, and steelhead and rainbow trout. So I'd like to also speak to our vegetation on site, which was a major component of restoration. So we, as you can see in the photo of the site beforehand, it was a perched alluvial bar that had very little species and structural diversity in vegetation. And so we really aim to help restore aquatic habitat by restoring the riparian habitat. We selected a suite of native species that would provide stream shade and organic matter inputs, but also large woody debris inputs at the end of their lifetimes. And the way that we incorporated our planting was through engineered design. So we had a portion of our planting areas that were enhanced using large equipment. And those were dug kind of on average to a diameter of 25 feet. They were dug to summer groundwater depths, and then battered logs and slash were placed into those pits. They were then backfilled in with the best finds on site and planted. So we planted into those enhanced areas, but also into areas that weren't enhanced. And we wanted to know, was this an effective technique, and should we employ it into our restoration down the road? And while it hasn't been statistically significant, the difference it's made in terms of plant survival, we have seen that it's been effective, and it's been conducive to plant survival and plant health. So we've had, after 3 years of monitoring, decent survival on site. We've had about 53.6% survival, and 2 of those 3 years were extremely hot and dry, but only 1.6% of those surviving plants exhibit poor health. So that's great for us. We also had an opportunity to irrigate on site because there's a tributary nearby. And we found the irrigation did make a significant difference in terms of plant survival over time. But this isn't something we can do everywhere, but great for us to know as we move forward. And we have wrapped up our 3 years of intensive monitoring at Kelly Bar, but we look forward to going back here and continuing our work going forward.
Now we're going to move over to a kind of a different project on the other fork of the river, South Fork of the river. This is about 3 miles up River of the Forks, the junction. And this is Hotel and Gulch. It's a pretty interesting project that was identified by folks like Taz and other folks that are in the river doing fish surveys for years. This section of river has some cold water at nothing, and then there's like a 3-mile section of river that fish need to get through before they get to their next substantial refugia during their migration or wherever there's hanging out. So it was identified because fish would be nosing up in the bank at this groundwater input that was happening. And this is historically a confusing site because it had been changed a lot during mining. The original alignment of this creek is totally lost. No one knows where exactly it went. But what we do know is that in the 90s or 80s, when people started becoming or bringing up that this could be a spot we could focus on, the alignment was over here and went through 2 culverts across the road. And so this would blow out during storm events, and the culverts are an obvious fish barrier. And the historic, as we're calling it, western alignment over here was chosen as an option to restore this situation. We just put the channel back in its old channel, which is a big undertaking because it had been filled with a ton of debris and stuff from the 64 flood. People put stuff there. There was dumping that happened in there. So around like the tip of that arrow, like we were digging 18 feet down to get to the old channel, to give you an idea of the amount of digging, the excavation that was needed. But then we put in this giant bridge, I say it's a ton of metal in that bridge. It was very well engineered bridge for logging traffic and to meet county standards. So this is a pretty big undertaking, just engineering bridge wise, but that'll allow stuff to go through in both directions, fish coming up or going down and material to come through during events. So that's the main design. The goals of this were to allow passage through there, coarse sediment, large wood, create self-maintaining western stream channel alignment. And also on top of these goals, we also wanted to do some revegetation there. So we do pretty extensive revegetation process there as well. So if you went on site beforehand and someone said what we were gonna do, you might be like, what you're doing stream restoration here? Like that's the stream. But that's the stream directly after implementation, month after implementation. So you can see that it's not always what it looks like on the surface. And it's important to listen to your fish biologists when they tell you about a cold water source or something that's catching their eyes in the river. This is a really good example of that, I think. So we started digging up at the top, put in step pools. This is all engineered by MLA on the coast. And then as we got down and the contractors putting in the bridge at the same time, as we got down just below the bridge, the excavator hit this jet. It was right after we pulled 2 cars and engines out of there. Yep, it was the 60s and so their 50s or whatever it was. And it was like a jet, like a jet boat of water coming out of there. And the whole mood on site changed to kind of an emergency mode to make sure that we didn't create a big sediment plume, we didn't create some disturbance. But also we were pretty excited because that gave us an indication of what those fisheries people were feeling in the river. And that, once we got water management under control, that is the location of our downstream alcove, which got field fit to be put there. And so from that point down remains perennial now year round, and has fish passage for juveniles. And then when we got to the mouth, we had some excavation funds left over. And this is another good lesson learned in this project, was we told the contractor, just put a tooth on your bucket and dig at that bedrock till there's no dollars left. And so for 3 days or day and a half, it turned into 3 days of work, but totally day and a half of digging. He chipped away that bedrock and made this kind of ugly rectangle pool. And that has turned out to be one of the greatest features of this project. And flashback to the other project about how fish are seeking out any thermal refugia on this river. These rivers are very temperature impaired, and any amount of space like that that's oriented the way it is, where it doesn't get flushed out by the river, it creates a pocket of cold water there that's fed by that spring. So that orange line's the river, and you can see like our summer temperatures, we get up over 28, 29 degrees. Salmon aren't stoked about that. But in the mouth, even though it does cross, my threshold line is a little different than what in the previous presentations. It's at when coho start to look for off channel or like some refugia. It's not like a critical threshold, I wouldn't call it, but it's a threshold, indicator threshold. So that's what the 19 degrees is. You can see that peak temperatures in our little enhanced bathtub are lower than average temperatures in the river for the entire summer. And that's because of that downstream alcove spring that never gets over 16.5 degrees even in August. And that's in like, my temperature logger in there is in like 4 inches of water. So it tells you the output of that is like pretty dang good.
So as Stefan described, we have had fisheries observations in the site and primarily in that enhanced mouth. It has been used by hundreds of fish each summer. We're seeing coho in there, we're seeing Chinook in there, as well as steelhead and rainbow trout. And this project, by addressing the fish barrier, opened up nearly 1.5 miles of nice tributary habitat. And this is also providing habitat that is downstream of the bridge, perennial, year-round, which wasn't the case beforehand. And while we haven't seen a lot of fish usage in the tributary yet, we have seen 25 fish using it both during high flows and during the summer. And they've been occupying this alcove near the seep Stefan was explaining, which pops out just on the side, the upstream side of it. And yeah, this project not only enhanced the mouth habitat, within the tributary provided more cover and structure in the channel. And in terms of fisheries benefit, this project is sandwiched between the nearest large tributary, which is 3 miles upstream, and downstream 1 mile to the next tributary. So this is critical thermal refugia for fish. In terms of vegetation on site, we employed the same enhanced planting area technique here, and we've had really good success, have about 68% survival, and we've just concluded our 2nd year of monitoring. We also used hydroseeding on site, which we found to be a pretty effective technique, which we're going to be using going forward. And we've had a lot of native species coming in both Calibar and hoteling on their own, which is great to see. So we're looking forward to learning more in our 3rd year of monitoring at hoteling. And just to summarize, we're, like others in the region and around the world, are observing changes in our climate, changes in our flows. And we recognize that providing habitat that is engaging the floodplain at different flows is going to be critical for both those high flows in the winter that may be more variable, but also in low summer flows to provide that cold water refugia. And we recognize our monitoring is one of the critical pieces of our restoration work, because if we're not looking at what we're doing and how effective it has been, we won't learn anything going forward. So we have a lot of lessons that we've derived from these projects, and we look forward to building on them in the future and really scaling up the restoration work we're doing throughout the drainage. And again, these lessons have really highlighted the importance of small pockets of quality habitat, because if you are able to restore just a small alcove, it can make a really big difference. So I want to thank you all, and thank all the partners and funders and volunteers who've made this work possible over the years. So thank you.
All right,
Are
thanks.
there-
We have time for probably one question. Any great questions here? All right, well then that makes it easier to move on to the next presenter, I guess.